South Park is a fundamentally mean-spirited, nasty show that has made American culture not only coarser, but crueler. It's a sentiment that clearly a lot of people seem to believe and agree with. But is it true, though? Created in 1997, South Park is the hit adult animated comedy still airing new episodes to this day on Comedy Central and various streaming platforms. Created by Matt Stone and Trey Parker.
Oh, hi, I'm Trey Parker.
And I'm Matt. Matt Stone, that is.
Oh, you nut.
The series immediately garnered attention for its unique style of animation, and more importantly, its crudeness.
All the bad in society is our fault, blame us.
The show really did push what was allowed on television to its limits for the time. Then, when they made the feature-length film, they naturally pushed the envelope as much as possible for movies too, with them most of the time focusing on some pretty dark and serious topics that you wouldn't see tackled a whole lot for the time, such as Stan's grandfather wanting Stan to assist him in killing himself, to creating an entire episode dedicated to making jokes about breast cancer, or the episode where Kenny tragically dies in the hospital, and instead of using his acquired stem cells to save his life, Cartman instead uses them to build a pizza restaurant for him. When you look at episodes all let out like that, then it seems like a no-brainer. Yeah, of course that comes off mean-spirited. And I could go on. Britney Spears shooting herself in the head, a little kid dying because Stan couldn't win a hockey game, Cartman threatening Butter so much that he puts him in the hospital, then comes into said hospital to feed him food that he's allergic to. Point is, there's a lot. But did this set out to do that? Did Matt and Trey go into this thinking, alright, this is it, let's see what fucked up thing we can do today?
So, are you guys as anti-Semitic as some might believe?
You know, a lot of people have accused South Park of anti-Semitism, but I'm Jewish and proud of my heritage, and so I can say with some certainty that I am not anti-Semitic.
I am, however.
And beyond that, did they do it unintentionally? Because the argument isn't whether or not they intend for it to be mean-spirited, it's whether or not it is, point blank. Now, I'm not here to argue whether or not South Park has been mean-spirited in the past, because believe me, it has. I think most can agree an episode like Stanley's Cup is heavily bogged down by the fact that it's basically a 22-minute build-up to a kid dying in hospital.
What, you got asthma or something?
No, he has cancer.
What?
But I'm here to discuss whether or not its mean-spiritedness is a part of its identity. Is South Park mean to its core? Well, let's find out. But first, I know you guys have all heard me talk about Manscaped's wonderful all-in-one Performance Package 4.0 by now, so I won't talk to you about it this time. I'm instead going to talk about something serious. Did you know that every hour one man is diagnosed with testicular cancer? Well, today's sponsor, Manscaped.com, have actually partnered with the Testicular Cancer Society to donate $50,000 to the longtime partner and those affected by the disease. Along with that, be sure to take care of yourself using their helpful Lawnmower 4.0 body trimmer with advanced skin-safe technology, and check out manscaped.com/TCS to learn more about how you can perform simple routine self-checks at home to prevent this. If you want to go even further, you can also go to testicularcancersociety.org and make a donation for a great cause. So go to manscaped.com today and use promo code ALICEMARK for 20% off, plus free international shipping. And thank you Manscaped for sponsoring this video. So, South Park. Now, I think it would be best to try and figure out what the point of South Park is. What were Matt and Tress setting out to do when creating the series? And with the show being on the air for around 20 years at this point, it's safe to say whatever point it had initially probably isn't what it is now. I think that's something special about the show. Like, what's the point of The Simpsons? To just be a family sitcom about a middle-class family living in America. That's what it started as back in the 80s, and that's what it's going to be until the end of time. All computers in the world could blow up tomorrow, and they'd still find a way to put something out on Sunday at Fox. But with South Park, because the series has had the same creators and largely the same staff the entire time, it's allowed the show to evolve and grow with them. What's South Park? Well, it's whatever Matt and Trey wanted to be that week. At the beginning, it was nothing more than a raunchy adult comedy. Occasionally, they'd have a more poignant episode like Big Gay Al's Big Gay Boat Ride. I promise it's not as bad as it sounds.
Now shake. Now, don't be gay. Don't be gay, Spark.
But for the most part, they were just aimed at making you laugh through a series of bizarre concepts, inappropriate swearing, and current pop culture references. But as the series went on, it seems like the two of them started to focus more and more on trying to tackle topical events of the time. Stuff like the Terry Schiavo incident or global warming. You can't really blame them. When you've been working on a show for even 5 years, you're bound to run out of normal ideas to do with the characters and end up just looking at the news for concepts. The thing I can at the very least appreciate about these kinds of episodes are that they're taking a recent subject and trying to make it their own. Like, they aren't literally commenting on Terry Schiavo. That was Kenny. They simply took the incident from the time to explore the topic of whether or not it was fair to keep someone in a vegetative state for the rest of their life. Or global warming being represented through the fictional man Bear Pig. Like, obviously you can tell what they're doing, but the episode still stands on its own. Hell, I didn't know what global warming was as a kid. But I fucking loved the Man Bear Pig episode, because I didn't need knowledge of it to appreciate the humor. He said cereal instead of super, and that was good enough for 8-year-old me. But you know what episode I didn't enjoy as much when I was younger? 2 Days Before the Day After Tomorrow. Despite finding a lot of the jokes funny, a part of me couldn't fully appreciate it, because younger me was more confused about what they were trying to comment on. These are both episodes tackling global warming, but one replaces it with a comedic fictional stand-in, and therefore stands on its own, and the other is just global warming point blank. Episodes like these, despite being quite topical for the time, will be able to be rewatched over and over again until the end of time, and won't lose a lot of what made them great in the first place. But what about episodes like the one about Obama being elected president? Obama was the president when I first watched this episode, and I still had no idea what they were talking about. Politics? Fuck, I'd rather be playing Sonic Heroes. Now, even early in its run, the show had dabbled in directly discussing real-world events, such as the Season 5 episode that focused on Bin Laden, and all the stuff surrounding him and how it was affecting the world. Like, when I first saw this episode, the issue they were tackling had long passed, so a majority of it went over my head, like why Stan's mum Sharon was stuck on the couch watching the news in a depressed state, or even the intro.
Remember when life used to be simple and cool? Not really.
But as it went on though, this concept of taking a real-world event and making it your own was sort of lost on the show almost entirely. Sure, they'd do it occasionally, but more recently it appears they've almost completely given up on attempting this, opting to instead just straight up reference the topical thing, like pretty much the entirety of Season 20, which would just take whatever was going on that week of the presidential election and animated it. See, with this, I do sort of need to know what's going on across the water to get a lot of the jokes they're trying to tell. It doesn't stand on its own enough, because it feels like they're repetitively repeating the same jokes and gags over and over again because, well, that's what's going on in the news, instead of using the topic simply as a talking point to try and tell an entertaining story. But strangely enough, it appears as if Matt and Tread don't even care about whatever point they have, and oftentimes they're making an episode where they don't even know what their message is until it's done.
And we don't come into a show, we try never to come into a show saying, let's say this, let's make this point. We try to always say, let's tell this story, and then come Monday or Tuesday morning when the show's done, we're like, oh look, that's our point.
And see, that's the thing that always confused me when people brought up South Park trying to make these grandiose stands on certain topics. When they'd criticize episodes, it was never for the quality of the jokes or the characters, but for their opinions or the point they were trying to make. It confused me because I never watched South Park to see Matt and Tread tackle certain issues. I watched it because I simply thought it was funny, and it seems like the creators had a similar mindset when making them, focusing much more on what makes the best story rather than what represents their point the best. See, you can give Trey Parker shit for a lot of things if you wanted to. Starring in Despicable Me 3 is, in my opinion, his most questionable move. But the guy fucking knows story structure and how to naturally tell a compelling narrative.
What should happen between every beat that you've written down is either the word therefore or but. And then this happens. No, it should be this happens, and therefore this happens. But this happens, therefore this happens.
He's been pretty public about the way he writes South Park, and it's that instead of coming out with an opinion he has on how you can convey that in a story, the story always comes first. I mean, you can literally see their thought process in the documentary 6 Days to Air, which shows you how they come up with their episode ideas. It's always, well, this thing is going on in the news recently, what if this character did this because of it, wouldn't that be funny? And oftentimes what they find would be funny isn't the most politically correct way to tackle these subjects. Why is that? Is it because they're the devil incarnate and want to indoctrinate people into their fucked up way of thinking? Well, as they've said before, it mostly just comes from them finding a lot of humor and doing something fucked up and pissing people off. Even if they don't intentionally go into an episode with that goal in mind, it often veers in that direction because it's the kind of people they are.
But that's the thing is, you know, we don't ever start a season or even start a show sitting down going, what can we do that's really fucked up?
Right.
You know, it's always just saying, oh, this thing is really interesting and it's taking off. And then we end up just taking this big fucked up route because we're fucked up people.
Here's the thing though, I think I've shown well enough that Trey and Matt don't intend to make a show that's mean-spirited, unless they've just consistently been lying for the past 25 years, which believe you me, if they are, they deserve a fucking medal because I've sat through hours and hours and hours of interviews starring these guys from the start of the show until now, and their story has remained pretty much the same. But again, it's not a question of if they do or don't intend on making the series mean-spirited, but if they've ended up doing it unintentionally. When discussing South Park online, I mostly see the same two complaints pop up time and time again. The first being that the show takes really horrible stances on certain issues and gives off a very bad message to its viewers, and second that the show and its creators don't take any stance on issues and instead chooses to teach the message that nothing matters and you shouldn't treat any situation seriously. Now, if you have a functioning brain, you can see the obvious contradictions in these statements. And that's that South Park can't simultaneously be devilishly giving a bad message and cowardly standing in the middle, unable to take a side. I understand that not necessarily both sides may agree with the other, but clearly at the very least one of these bold statements must be wrong. So first of all, let's address the side of the argument that states South Park usually stands in the middle of a lot of social issues. Where does this come from? Well, I think this idea usually stems from the fact that oftentimes South Park doesn't pick and choose what they want to make fun of or take a side on, which can sometimes make it unclear what exactly they're trying to say. Not to mention that in interviews, Trez claim that they like to stand in the middle and make fun of both sides, but does that necessarily mean that they're saying you're dumb for caring about it? To me at least, it seems like Trey and Matt don't necessarily hate the idea of caring too much about a subject, but instead the way you advocate your opinion to other people, which is where their disdain for celebrity culture comes from. For example, in what I would call one of the worst episodes in the entire series, we have them making a story about the topic of sex changes, with the overall gag here being that Kyle and his dad take it to the extreme by turning black and into a dolphin respectively. It makes just as little sense in the actual episode, I promise.
Look, Ike, your daddy's a dolphin!
Anyways, despite what can be seen as such an obviously anti-sex change episode, the series also spans a scene dedicated to discussing why someone would want to get a sex change, and the positive impact it can have on someone's life.
Sometimes a person's outside doesn't reflect who they are on the inside. They feel like there's somebody trapped in another person's body. They can have a surgery that makes them more into the person they see themselves as.
Or the episode Raising the Bar, which is all about the subject of obesity in America, and how accepted being overweight has become with it being used for entertainment purposes. They spend a lot of the episode poking fun at this concept, but just as much time is spent instead going over how worried the characters are, that these serious issues are merely used to be glorified and mocked by millions of people. Which then results in the thought that maybe they're partially responsible for that.
How did shamelessness get to this? And then I started thinking, maybe it was us. I don't know, but maybe somehow we lowered the bar a long time ago. And now we're all sitting here in the stink of it all.
It's one of the few times in the series where they actually sit down and acknowledge the idea that they might have negatively affected the way people see issues in our society. With examples such as these, you can look at them and go, well come on, take a side, South Park. You can't make fun of the subject for 22 minutes and throw in a line at the end about how the other side might feel. But for the most part, with a lot of the issues they tackle, you can very easily see the point they're trying to make by just watching the episodes and listening to what the characters have to say. Like, if I were to tell you that South Park has an entire episode where they say the N-word 3 dozen times, you'd probably think it'd be incredibly racist and awful to sit through. But when you actually sit and watch the thing, you'd see that the message to the episode is actually about how hateful words can affect someone, and criticizing those who use them so liberally. It just so happens that Trey and Matt are portraying this message through their own fucked up sense of humor.
If there was a word as kind of hateful as the N-word applies to black people, if one of those if there was a word like that against white people would make it illegal.
It seems like from examples like these, the show doesn't really stand in the middle of these topics, and instead shows both sides of the argument because you need conflict for a story, and that's what they care about most? Before ultimately ending with whatever point that feels ends the story the best. It's not about pushing an agenda, it's about being funny. Like, for as much as the series spends making jokes about, let's say, gay people for example, there are just as many episodes of the show being incredibly respectful towards gay people.
But if love is love, then it takes form in all shapes and sizes.
I guess just because I don't understand it doesn't mean I shouldn't support it.
This isn't them saying they disagree with any of this stuff, they're simply making jokes about anything they want. Whether or not you think they're allowed to do that, that is what they're doing, you have to acknowledge it. Matt and Trav made it fairly clear over the years that for them nothing is off limits, even creating an episode featuring an illustration of the Muslim prophet Muhammad after being threatened of a bombing if they were to do so. They aren't teaching a message that nothing matters. If you want that, then just go watch Rick and Morty.
Nobody exists on purpose. Nobody belongs anywhere. Everybody's gonna die. Come watch TV.
They're instead teaching a message that no matter what situation, there always should be some kind of space where it's allowed to be poked fun at. Whether or not you agree with that mindset is a whole other topic though. Now, I've done a lot of defending South Park, and gave reasons as to why it isn't as evil or bad as people make it out to be, but the show isn't perfect. There are definitely cases in which they mess up. I think a big reason for this has to do with the schedule the show's production runs under, with episodes being fully produced in less than a week. Now, there are many perks to being under such a tight schedule, with one of the main ones being that when you have to get an episode written in such a short amount of time, it means there's less room for you to do rewrites and therefore second guess yourself, and has undoubtedly contributed to some of the best episodes to come out of the show. But when you're making a show in less than a week, sometimes you don't have the time to properly think out whatever point you're trying to make, and it can result in your episode not portraying the point you want it to, or at the very least, it does it in a very bad way. For example, there's an episode in the 23rd season of the show called Bored Girls. It's one of the more controversial episodes they've done in recent times, and it's because they focus their ass story on the topic of whether or not trans people should be allowed to partake in the sports of the gender they transition to. And the thing is, I get what point they're trying to make. Like, I understand what they're saying, they just go about it in a horrible way. The point Matt and Trey are trying to get at here is that whether or not trans people should be allowed to partake, others should also be allowed to have the discussion without being labeled as a transphobe. That's it. It's a very simple point. But the problem is that they're doing this using the most extreme examples of these characters to make that point. Literally just a macho man Randy Savage type who's claiming to be a girl to beat them at the games. It literally took me watching this one 3 times to go, oh, okay. If you ignore all this stuff, there's actually a pretty decent point in here about not every situation being black and white, and that there can be a little more nuance in conversation. But okay, this is buried under the much more talked about aspect of this whole character. Another factor that doesn't really help is that there isn't really a lot of trans representation in media, so when there finally isn't something like this, it can be understandable why people would be upset. I'm not defending this episode at all, by the way. Matt and Trey did it to themselves with this one. But why did they do that? Because they're transphobic? Well, no, there's actually a way more simple answer to this. They thought it'd be funny to take their most PC character and put them with a foil who consistently tries to frame them as being very not PC. At the end of the day, Matt and Trey are making a comedy, and I think it points the side of them that's pulling them towards the comedy can inadvertently cause their point to be completely misinterpreted. In some ways, I think this is very commendable, that they're not aiming to make a show that preaches their viewpoint to the audience. In fact, they've outright stated that just because their episodes can make a point, it doesn't mean that they're entirely saying these are solutions. That's not their job.
But I think we do better when we when we deal with the emotions within it instead of trying to come up with a solution. You know, whatever the nut is of the argument, we put it in 2 characters' mouths and try to find the comedy in that. We used to like try to figure out what it should be in a solution, you know what I mean? And then but...
Well, I guess we learned our lesson. No, we didn't, dude. No, we didn't.
But at the same time, when you're constantly buying into the belief that your show is some great satire on your culture, then you do kind of have to be careful about the way your episodes can represent you, and how someone might say, this character did this? That must be what Matt and Trey think. Their attention veering more into focusing on political episodes in a lot of their shows certainly hasn't helped. I think I've mentioned it before, but there's a great video by Bernie Vids about that very subject. I definitely do think there's some level of blame to be placed on Matt and Trey for this perception of their show. Like, you can say as many times as you want, we don't want to do politics, we just want to do episodes about the boys, before I'm just sitting here like, well, what's stopping you? Although I will say the most recent season has gotten better about that sort of thing.
Looks like someone forgot what day it was. Haha, bitch!
Do you know what sexual assault is?
But I also think that's a two-way street. Like, I feel like it should be obvious by now, but most of the characters in South Park are, well, characters. They're not puppets. Well, okay, never mind, they are puppets. But they're not always mouthpieces for Trey and Matt to say, okay, this character will say this because it's what we think, and this character will say this because they're a straw man and it's what we don't think. Delightfully devilish, Matt Stone. I instead think they have certain characters say some bad stuff because it's in character for them? Shocking, I know. Like, I don't feel like I need to explain to you that you shouldn't be idolizing Eric Cartman, and I don't think Matt and Trey want you to either. They have an entire episode consisting of Cartman telling jokes about breast cancer. Is this because Trey and Matt are mocking those who suffer from it? No, it's because they thought it'd be funny to do an episode where Cartman's a shithead and ends up paying the price for it. They did the same thing with Scott Tenorman Must Die, they did the same thing with Awesome-O. This one just so happens to be about a much more serious subject. Or how about the aforementioned show where Britney Spears shoots herself in the head? And the episode revolves around how people continue to still exploit her for the sake of money. That sounds pretty bad, but in actuality, the message of it is how obsessive the general public can be with celebrity gossip, feeding off of their failures and not realizing that they too are people. Doesn't sound too mean-spirited to me. I don't know why the stigma of being mean-spirited has been lumped onto South Park so much, yet shows like The Simpsons and Family Guy are somehow exempt from this label with the general public. Family Guy consistently has episodes and characters that I'd argue are 10 times more mean compared to anything South Park has done in its entire run, and with those there's rarely any semblance of well-meaning or care. And despite The Simpsons more often than not being seen as a much more tame show compared to a lot of adult animation these days, at its worst I'd argue again that they've had episodes wildly more mean-spirited than South Park. What about that wonderful moment where Bart stands on his phone while Homer hangs from a tree begging for help, or where the entire town drives Bart to attempted suicide just for losing a baseball game?
Jump! Who said that?
Why aren't tweets with thousands of likes addressing this type of stuff? I can only imagine it's because South Park more overtly covers these more hot-button issues, and isn't afraid to poke fun at them, making it easier to disagree and get riled up about whatever it is they've said or done. For every example you give me about South Park having an episode that could be deemed mean, I could give you another that instead ends up being quite inspirational or lighthearted or optimistic. Some of my favorites would include such episodes as The List, where after learning that he was voted the ugliest kid in school, Cal goes down a depressive path of ridicule and being ostracized from most of his peers, but by the end realizes that looks don't matter much once you leave school, and you'll instead be judged by your abilities, so that's what you should focus on.
I'm sure Abe Lincoln was right. I don't want to find out I'm good looking and become a total shithead when I grow up. Abe Lincoln?
There's the Mormon episode, in which they spend a majority of it mocking Mormons and how dumb their religion is. But by the end of it, you see the message, which is that whether or not the Mormon faith is based on a lie, it's irrelevant because as long as it teaches a good message and promotes being a good person, then ultimately it's not a bad thing.
I don't care if Joseph Smith made it all up, because what the church teaches now is loving your family, being nice, and helping people. But you're so high and mighty you couldn't look past my religion and just be my friend back. You got a lot of growing up to do, buddy. Suck my balls.
There's the You're Getting Old and Asperger's two-parter, which in fact made me cry as a kid when I first saw it on TV, which features Stan growing distant from everyone around him and starting to become more depressed, before realizing that instead of dwelling in the past, he should instead embrace change with open arms, giving him a brand new outlook on life.
Maybe it won't be like before, but at least it'll all be new. And that's what's gonna make it so that I can keep going. For the first time in a long time, I'm really excited.
They immediately went back on it, but that's besides the point. And without a doubt, my absolute favourite example is Raisins, which shows Stan facing his first breakup and feeling as if nothing in the world matters anymore, before an inspirational speech from Butters, who went through something similar, makes him see that there's a lot in life to enjoy and be happy about, so he may as well focus on the things important to him.
So I have to take the bad with the good. So I guess what I'm feeling is like a beautiful sadness. I guess that sounds stupid.
Yeah, South Park can be mean. But I think I've shown today that the series covers a wide set of emotions, and that the show can't really be tied down or defined by a single trait. Sure, it can be mean, but it can be a whole lot of other things too, just like any person in the world. I don't think South Park says nothing matters. I think it's instead saying that some kind of outlet has to exist that simply shows someone that every now and then, you have to take a step back and see the humor in situations. And I don't think that's a bad thing to do at all.
They think that if you're making fun of something, it means you totally don't care about it, you don't think about it, it doesn't affect you, and whatever, and it's like completely the opposite. You know, it's like, it's exactly how we think about things.
I think the main issue that's caused this is that nobody really truly understands what South Park is. Apparently not even its creators. I also think that's kind of a great thing too, that it can be so many different things at any given time. But despite that, I certainly don't think it's fair in my opinion to paint the whole series as being mean-spirited. And I hope maybe I've shown you some of this too. But if not, then oh well. I guess it's just an opinion after all. Like Trey Parker says, it doesn't really matter. Everyone sees their own thing in it.